Want help to grow your business? Download Bryn, the world's first business advisor in your pocket. To find out more, visit bryn.ai or search the App Store today.
G'day, I'm Troy Dean and you're watching Rinse and Repeat on Business Blueprint. Of course, this is the series where we are helping you create recurring revenue in your business. Why? Because if you've been following along, you'll know by now, recurring revenue really is the holy grail of all business models. Recurring revenue gives you predictable cash flow in your business. It allows you to manage the growth of your business. It makes it predictable when you can hire your next staff member and when you can manage the expansion of your business. And it dramatically reduces stress levels because you don't wake up on the first of each month and have to go and find tens of thousands of dollars just to keep the lights on and pay the rent and pay your staff. So recurring revenue really is a great business model, and my hope for you in this series is that we can help you generate some recurring revenue in your business. This is the final episode of this particular series, Rinse and Repeat, and in this episode, you're going to learn how to prove there is a market for your recurring revenue product before you spend a lot of time going and building it. And here is exactly what we're going to cover in this episode. You're going to learn the importance of proving your business model before you build it. You're going to learn the definition of a minimum viable product and why you should build one. You're going to learn how to make sure your product solves a problem worth solving. You're going to learn how to make sure your message matches what your marketplace actually wants. We're going to talk about how to make sure people will actually pay for your product, which is something that a lot of people forget to quantify. You're also going to learn how to identify the riskiest assumption in your business model and hopefully mitigate that risk. And we're going to talk about how to crowdsource the feature set of your minimum viable product. You ready? Let's get started. Okay, don't waste your time. That's the catch cry for this episode. Don't waste your time building something that nobody wants. The purpose really of this episode is to teach you how to apply some lean principles from the lean startup methodology so that you can prove that there is a marketplace for your business and that there are customers willing to pay for your product before you waste a lot of time building something that nobody wants. There is something worse than building something that nobody wants, and that's building something that a few people love. And I'll talk more about that a little bit later on in this episode. It's something that I've done, and I hope that you can learn from my mistakes and not make the same mistake. So lean principles. What are lean principles? Well, if we just go back in time to the manufacturing revolution when the Japanese invented something called just-in-time manufacturing. And in the old days, what would happen, particularly in the automotive manufacturing industry, is that an automotive manufacturer would have a massive warehouse of car parts that they would keep in storage. And then as cars were rolling around the production line, they would go and get parts out of storage and they would bring them to the production line and put them on cars. And the Japanese had a look around and said, you know what, there's a lot of room here and a lot of space and a lot of time wasted in getting these parts from the warehouse and putting them on the cars. Why don't we just have the trucks turn up with the parts as we need them? So they pioneered this methodology called just-in-time inventory. And that is, you accept inventory just in time when you need it. So you don't actually hold excess inventory. Nowadays, if you visit any modern car manufacturing plant, you'll see a production line surrounded by roller doors that open up and trucks back in with the parts on the back of the truck that are loaded off the truck straight onto the production line just as they need them. So what does this mean for us? How can we start thinking about applying lean principles into our business? And the fundamental philosophy, if you like, with the whole lean startup and lean principle thinking is that it's designed to remove waste from your business. Because if you can remove waste from your business, then you can maximize profit, and that will definitely help you scale. So The Lean Startup was a book written by Eric Ries. It's a fantastic book. I strongly suggest you get your hands on it and read it. It's not light reading, it's quite dense, and it does take quite a bit to get through. There's quite a lot of new principles in the Lean Startup book if you haven't read it. If you're not used to thinking about things in this way, then it will take you a while to get through it. But it really is mandatory reading, I think, for anyone who is interested in disrupting a business model or having a startup. And really taking, as we've talked about, taking the lowest hanging fruit, which is what you're currently selling as services and trading time for money, and bundling that into a recurring revenue product, you really are disrupting a current way of doing business. So I think it's important that you at least have a high level overview understanding of the lean startup principles. The most important aspect of the lean startup methodology is what I'm going to show you on this slide now. Now, there's lots of stuff going on this slide. I don't expect you to be able to read all of it, but pay attention to what's in the green dots, which is build, measure, and learn. In the blue dots, we have ideas, code, and data. Not so important. What we're going to focus on is build, measure, and learn. So you've probably got an idea now that you've got a product that you can take to market that is going to solve a problem, and customers are going to love it. So your role, your job, is to try and get through what is called the feedback loop, which is what you're looking at right now. Try and get through this customer feedback loop as quickly as possible. And the way we do that is we build something and we get it into our customers' hands and we get them using it. And we measure how they use it and we measure their feedback. And then we learn from that experiment and we rebuild it, or we build something new, or we iterate on the product. So build, measure, learn are the three pillars of that feedback loop, and your job as an entrepreneur is to get through that feedback loop as quickly as you possibly can. Running Lean is a secondary book written by a gentleman by the name of Ash Maurya. It's based on the Lean Startup principles, and actually the series editor of this book is still Eric Ries, who wrote the Lean Startup. Ash Maurya poses in Running Lean a very practical way of applying the Lean Startup principles to an existing business. Now, I had the good fortune to be mentored by Ash when we bought his book and we bought into his program, and he gave us some one-on-one mentoring online, and we learned so much about removing waste from our business and getting our products into our customers' hands as quickly as we can. The one rule that we have now in our business is no code. We're in the web design, web dev, and web application space, so we build products that are sold on the internet, software and web-based applications. And our rule now is that we're not allowed to build any code until we've quantified that we actually have a problem that customers are willing to pay for. Because believe me, building the code is the sexy stuff. It's the stuff that we know how to do really well. It's our comfort zone, if you like, and it's what we want to do lots of. And our rule now, after speaking with Ash and being mentored by Ash, is we're not allowed to build any code unless we have quantified that we've got something that customers are willing to pay for. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that as this episode rolls on. So in our example, when we built our Business Accelerator program, the way that we did this, before we built an entire program, we ran 3 webinars. And the way that we did that is we just said to our potential customers, we're going to run a training webinar. We want you to pay for it. It's going to be priced between $97 and $197. At that price point, what does it need to include to be valuable? We just asked them, we're going to run this webinar, you're going to pay for it, what do we have to cover? And they told us a whole bunch of things that they wanted us to cover in that webinar. Now, we sold tickets to that webinar before we actually opened Keynote and before we designed any slides. That was our way of saying, we want to quantify that we've got a problem here that you're willing to pay for a solution for. So pony up and pay for the solution, and then we'll go and build it. Just a very practical example of how you can apply lean principles. Instead of building a feature-rich product and then trying to sell it, try and get it to market and try and get customers to buy into it before you build it. If the example is a 3-part webinar series, you could just run one webinar and say, in this webinar, we're going to cover topic X, Y, Z. What do we need to cover to make it valuable? And your customers tell you, and then you run that webinar. And in the second webinar, you say, in this second webinar, we're going to cover topic A, B, C. What are the 2 biggest questions you've got for this webinar? And your customers tell you, and then you cover that topic. So you're constantly iterating on the product based on what your customers are telling you. That's an example of how to get through that feedback loop as quickly as possible without wasting time building something that nobody wants. Okay, right now I'd like to introduce you to a friend of mine who knows a lot more about lean principles than I do. He is from Alliance Software based in Melbourne. These guys are a web design and web app development agency, and they've also built some software that you may have come across on the internet, a piece of software called Market Samurai, which is a keyword research tool. They've made some mistakes in their business by building things they thought were great and not getting customer feedback early enough. They've learned from that, they've grown from that, and Ben is here to help us with applying lean principles in a practical way. So without further ado, let's go and meet Ben Stickland. Welcome back to Rinse and Repeat in Action on Business Blueprint. I'm here with my good friend from Alliance Software, Ben Stickland. Ben, welcome back to the show.
Good to be back.
Okay, in this series we're focusing on 6 main areas of the recurring revenue business model, and specifically we're talking to you about proving that a market exists or trying to prove that the business is going to succeed. Basically, stacking the odds in your favour, giving yourself the best chance of success.
Sure.
Why should we do that? Why don't we just go and build something and then try and sell it?
And I think the natural tendency is to want to do that. I think the tendency is that if you're not making your product, you're not achieving. It's not real progress. And we hear the stats that 80% of small businesses fail within some period of time, but we somehow think that's not going to be me. We think that we're a bit better than that. But the reality is the failure rates are catastrophic. And so the reason we want to test is because we don't want to be a catastrophe.
Sort of relatively new for me over the last sort of 3 or 4 years, but I cast my mind back 8 years ago when I started out in the online space. I mean, you have to build something in order for people to test it and try and sell it to them, right? What does that look like? How do you actually test something before you go build it?
And so I would encourage you to think about this in 2 parts. So firstly is just getting a deep understanding of the problem, and so we call it sort of problem interviews and solution interviews. So problem interviews start out first, and that's where you've got a gut feeling that there's a problem in this industry. Maybe you've worked in it, maybe you've talked to somebody, maybe you've been a consumer, but you think there's a problem in it. And often people think, well, I know this industry because I've been in there for 20 years, and I've seen those people be horrendously wrong, even though they're an expert in other ways. And so the problem interview starts with talking to people, finding the people who are the likely prospect for your business and asking them problem interview style questions. And I must confess, there's a great script. I think Ash Muir is his name. Running Lean is the book.
Correct.
You can get it at runninglean.co. And we've got to the point where now when entrepreneurs come to us and say, hey, I've got a whole bunch of money, I want to do this idea. I've literally got a pile of these books. I hand them a book and I say, just read the first couple of chapters. Can we please do a couple of problem interviews? And if you don't want to do them, come into my office. Just let's get the names and phone numbers of some people, and we'll follow the script through. And it's going to ask, okay, what are the problems? Why are they a problem? You try and get a real sense for whether it's a vague or whether it's actually something that's of significance to them, because ultimately, what you want to do is you want to solve burning problems. You want to solve things that are a real point of pain for people. And just because it's a point of pain for you doesn't mean it's a point of pain for everyone else in the market. So the first thing we do is we run problem interviews, and that's talking to people. And it's amazing. People think, oh, that's a whole lot of work. It's amazing. 5 problem interviews are often enough to convince you you're really wrong. Yeah. Like you're really, really wrong. Because like you get 5 people in a row yawning at you, you've got a problem. So we start with problem interviews, and then we go with solution interviews, where and the idea is we want to do as least amount of work as is required to gain as much information or input. And so solution interviews, we might, internally, what we do in the Samurai business is we'll do a lot of problem interviews. We'll record them, because often you get snippets of people's audio and you go, hang on, that's a really good way to phrase that, and it becomes part of your market.
To continue enjoying this presentation, download Brin, the world's first business advisor in your pocket. To find out more, visit brin.ai or search the App Store today.